You know, a couple years ago, I did a video of my least favorite bosses in video games. How was it? Well, it was a defossilizer video in early 2014. I think that should give you a good indicator of the level of quality it was. But after all this time, I decided to remake it because my opinions have changed a lot and I fought a lot more bad bosses. So you can expect some bosses from the previous list as well as plenty of new ones. Just a few rules to keep in mind. As always, one per franchise and only games I've played, but I'm also not going to be including Joker from Arkham Asylum, the Black Jewel from Wario World, and Comrade Black from the original The Blob. Why? Simple. I did very detailed rants on the three of those in top 10 worst finales, which wasn't that long ago, so if I were to include them here, I would just be repeating myself. Don't worry, even without those three, we still got plenty of good candidates to rip into today. So with all that said, let's begin.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
For this list, I was debating whether I should put Prince Vorkin from the Wonderful 101 or Mashtooth from the legendary Starfy at number 10. In the end though, I decided to go with Mashtooth. Oh boy, where do I start with this fight? I don't know, how about the first phase, which is a forced loss battle? But not just any forced loss battle, arguably the worst forced loss battle I've ever seen. In this phase of the fight, Mashtooth charges at you, and he has a shield around him so you can't do any damage to him. But not only that, you're stuck in the Monstar transformation, which can't jump high enough to avoid him. So from the beginning of the fight, it's clear that you can't do crap to him, but due to how much health you have, and how little damage Mashtooth does, it takes freaking forever for him to kill you. So you're just stuck there, not able to do anything, waiting until he finally kills you. The second phase of the fight is alright. It's nothing special, but it's decent. Then the third phase of the fight is just kind of annoying. In this phase of the fight, it takes several hits just for it to register 1 damage on Mashtooth, except for when he's in the background, in which case every meteor you deflect at him causes 1 damage. Yet they miss sometimes, which I don't even get the point of, because it's not like you can aim them. But again, this phase of the fight's kind of middle of the road. Nothing all that good, but at the same time, it's not going to make you pull your hair out. What will, though, probably, is the finisher for this fight. You see, for the finisher, Mashtooth shoots a meteor at you, and you have to mash the Y button to deflect it. And this game is not lenient with how fast it makes you mash the Y button, which makes absolutely no sense when you consider the fact that this game has about the same difficulty level as a Kirby game. Yeah, all the little kids playing this are sure gonna be experts at button mashing, huh, guys? I kid you not. It took me years to beat this guy just because the developers felt the need to make the fight just a teensy bit more epic.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
You know, I really liked the bosses in South Park: The Fractured But Whole. Each one had its own unique feel to it, and they were all pretty fun. Well, with the exception of one. And if you've seen my first countdown of the year, you already know which one I'm talking about. So why do I hate this boss so much? Very simple, it's a brutal difficulty spike like I said before. But why exactly is it such a brutal difficulty spike? Well, for starters, it's the first boss in the game that has a unique win condition, and the first one in the game that has a real-time event, which I really think should have been introduced separately. You know, give the player a little time to breathe between introductions. Now, the special objective of this fight is to chase after Classy, while the horde of strippers tries to keep you from her. It'll take you a bit to realize that no, you don't have to kill all the strippers, but it's pretty learnable. When things really start to ramp up is about halfway through the fight when Spontaneous Butte makes her entrance. Now, I find the real-time events kinda stressful to begin with, but what I think's really bad is that the first one in the game is also the hardest. I mean, for real, let's look at the other real-time events in this game. General Disarray. When the time runs out, he drops some lava on you, which does damage and inflicts burn. Shrub Niggurath. If you're in range when the time runs out, he kills you, but you'll be able to revive that party member soon enough. Mutant Cousin Kyle. It's not leading up to an attack at all. Rather, it's the window of time that you have to do an increased amount of damage to him. And then there's the Danger Deck, but the Danger Deck is meant to be brutally difficult to begin with. Now, what does Spontaneous Butte do when the timer runs out? Simple. She moves forward and squashes anyone in her path, killing them instantly. And it's not like you can revive them either, because they're already behind you. You have to make a beeline for the door, otherwise your remaining party member will get killed. Although the plus side is, she does also kill the other strippers. Now, this fight is lower on the list because if you know what you're doing, this fight really isn't that bad. You can time your attacks so that spontaneous bootay will cut off the other stripper's attacks, and you can use your charge attack to get ahead. Even if New Kid doesn't have one, Captain Diabetes does, so you're guaranteed to have it. But that's just the thing. How are you supposed to know to do any of that on your first time fighting her? As I think I've made pretty clear by shouting difficulty spike over and over again, this is a pretty early game boss. And also, doing multiple tries is a miserable experience, because every time you refight her, the game treats it as if it's the first time, so it takes you through the same tutorials and cutscenes over again without you being able to skip them. And trust me, the fight has a lot of interruptions, so yeah, you're gonna be pretty pissed refighting this thing. It's lower on the list though because, like I said, once you know what you're doing, she's not that big of a problem.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
At one point in Mario and Luigi Dream Team, you need to go inside of Big Massiv's dreams in order to wake him up. But before you can even fight him, you have to fight each one of his disciples. The interesting part about this is that you can fight them in any order you want, and each one has its own unique gimmick that you need to work around, which leads to varying degrees of boss quality. Thunder Sass you can only damage through counterattacks, which I actually found to be a pretty fun fight. Sorrow Fist you can only damage with excellent hits. Anything less will fully heal him. A bit annoying, but still manageable. Then you get to Beef Cloud and Heavy Zest, neither of which is pleasant to deal with. With Beef Cloud, the ref doesn't give you any special conditions. That's because Beef Cloud is a special case all his own. You see, he doesn't attack at all. Instead, he constantly heals himself. Oh, and it's not like he does it on his turn either. He doesn't have turns. It goes by real time. So you have to attack him as fast as possible. Don't use any of your special moves because that'll give him too much time to heal. And then there's Heavy Zest. What she lacks in Beef Cloud's annoyance factor, she makes up for with brutal difficulty. This boss is the biggest reason I'm thankful this game has an easy mode. You see, she uses the same attacks as Big Mossith, just weaker. Now that doesn't sound too bad, but that's because I haven't said her gimmick yet. You have to beat her within 3 turns. Now admittedly, she doesn't have that much HP, which is merciful, but at the same time, that means you have to balance dealing a heavy damage output while also avoiding her fairly difficult to dodge attacks so you don't have to waste a turn healing. Oh, and also, if Heavy Zest is dead, but her henchmen are still standing, it doesn't count. So yeah, if time runs out and even a single one of her minions is still standing, you have to redo the fight. Now, I actually really liked the idea of bosses with unique gimmicks and special win conditions, but not when they're as annoying and or brutally difficult as these two.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
You know, I really do find it strange that after all of these years, I've still found so many excuses to rant on the meat circus from Psychonauts. I don't know why. I guess that level just happens to work its way into so many of the negative lists that I've made. There are downsides to this, sure. It comes off as repetitive and borderline creepy, but at the same time, it does give me more time to reflect on what I hate so much about that level, and I think I've gained a new understanding as to why I dislike it so much. It's not because it's difficult or has the worst escort mission I've ever seen. No, I can adapt to those kind of things. The real reason why I hate it is because it's so anticlimactic. All the other mines in Psychonauts, with the exception of, I guess, the Brain Tumbler experiment, have so much to them, or at least feel like they have so much to them, while this level kind of feels short and disappointing. And nowhere do I think that's better exemplified than by the final boss, the two-headed dad monster. Now first off, I'll admit, bosses were never this game's strong suit. Sure, they had some good ones in there, but they were never the highlight of the game. But they were certainly better than this. Let's take a look at the concept first. The whole idea of the meat circus is that it's an amalgamation of both Raz and Oleander's brains, and the two-headed dad monster is the culmination of this, as it's a combination of both Raz and Oleander's inner demons into this huge monstrosity. So it would make sense for Raz and young Oleander to team up to fight this thing. Wait, that doesn't happen? Okay, so instead, Raz has a heartfelt reunion with his dad, which was really nice, and his dad gives him enough power to take this thing on. Okay, so this thing's gonna be super tough, right? I mean, it's a combination of Raz's own insecurities and the childhood trauma that caused the main villain to go off the rails. Nope. Despite this thing doing a lot of damage, it's not that difficult. Its attacks are not hard to avoid. So how do you damage this thing? I mean, previous bosses in the game make creative use of your psychic powers in order to take these things down. Here, you just go up to it and punch it, but only when you're powered up. And it cowers in fear when you're powered up, so there's no chance of you even being attacked. But once your power runs out, you'll have to wait for it to recharge while avoiding the attacks. So, hooray! A fight that revolves around waiting! I mean, sure, other bosses in the game had you waiting for things like, you know, an attack you could counter, but here, you're just waiting for your powers to recharge while avoiding the two-headed dad monster's attacks, which are pretty easy, both because of how powerful you are by this point in the game and how much space they give you on the battlefield. I swear, you guys were doing so well throughout most of this game. Why'd you screw up this badly at the end?
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
You know, on my original list, I put the rematch with Dark Pit from Kid Icarus Uprising on it. I don't know what I was thinking. Hades' Hart is definitely worse. Okay, so here's an idea. You have this game that's always been good about giving you enough space to move around during combat. Now let's take that and put you in a cramped, confined maze. What? That already sounds terrible? Well, no worries, dear viewer. We haven't even gotten started. You see, it's not just that you have barely any space, but the fact that the boss abuses the fact that you don't have any space. First off, the boss is mostly going to be far away from you, so I hope you brought something that can either home in on it or shoot through walls. What's that? You don't have one because you had no way of knowing you would need one? Well, say goodbye to your chances of clearing this chapter on a high intensity. I mean, sure, you can get up close and hit it, but you really don't want to do that. Why? Simple. After you hit it a couple times, it'll turn invincible and start charging all over the place. And if you were hitting it from up close, it's likely gonna run right over you. But as if that's not enough, it can also clone itself. Now, it's easy to tell which one is the clone. That's not the problem. The problem is that the clone explodes Bomberman style, taking out anything within a column of it. Also, the existence of Hades' Heart is kind of confusing. I mean, Pit destroys it, causing an explosion that leads Dark Pit to him, but Hades is perfectly fine afterwards. Why does he have a heart if he can survive without it?
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
You know, one of the most disappointing games I played in recent years was Gravity Falls Legend of the Gnome Gemulets. Now I know what some of you were thinking. It's a licensed game about a kid's TV show. What the heck were you expecting? Well, in a world where we can have phenomenal licensed games like Batman Arkham City or South Park The Fractured But Whole, I don't think it's that much of a stretch to believe that we could have a great Gravity Falls game too. Oh, and for those saying it never would have been good because it's based off of a show for kids, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. That's my rebuttal. In the end, it was decent. Nothing special, but the weakest aspect of the game was the boss. Yes, I said boss, not bosses. Oh, don't get me wrong, there are multiple boss battles in the game, but each one of them is virtually the same exact boss. And the thing is that the boss itself isn't really bad. It's somewhat fun and makes good use of the game's mechanics, but it's the same boss 5 times. Each time it's just slightly more difficult. It speaks to me saying that the game never really had much heart put into it like the show. It was just kind of meant as shovelware. And for a show that was able to wow so many people, it really sucks that the game didn't even try to do the same.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
You know, there are plenty of ways that my original version of this list has not aged well, but by far the biggest is the Mad Doctor entry. Due to the way that YouTube's copyright claiming system worked, I had it remove some of the music in it so I could still monetize the video, but it took out some of my speech as well. So since that original rant has been damaged, time to fix it with this one. Just to give you a bit of context, each boss in the Epic Mickey series gives you the option to either redeem or defeat them. Some of these decisions give you the choice of pain or thinner, while others change up the fight entirely. I bring this up because we need to take a look at both avenues to see just how bad this boss is. But before we even get to that, I think I should bring up that this is barely even a boss fight. It's just a gauntlet of enemies, but the game counts it as a boss, so I'm counting it as a boss. In order to redeem the Mad Doctor, you need to activate a series of mechanisms, and it's going to require one of each sketch. If you don't have all 3 sketches with you, then don't try to redeem him. Don't get me wrong, you can get the sketches you need by killing the Beetleworks around you, but it takes forever to do that, and you'll probably die before you have them. But even if you have all three, it's not exactly a cakewalk. You have to have an anvil on one platform, a TV on the other platform, and you standing on the third one. Even when you use the timer sketch to slow everything down, it's pretty hard to time it so all three of these things are active at once. But if you do manage to pull it off, the fight's over and you've successfully redeemed the Mad Doctor. If you decide to fight the Mad Doctor head on, well, you don't actually do that. Instead, you fight his robots. When you've killed enough, one of the generators will open up and you thin out the red eye on it and destroy it. And there's 3 of these. You can get 2 of them destroyed by freeing gremlins earlier in the level, but you're still gonna need to take out at least 1 of them. As for actually fighting the enemies, let's just say it's going to make you curse the fact that the developers of Epic Mickey didn't include invincibility frames. The tankers can hit you from a distance, the bashers and spinners can not only gang up on you, but also have insane knockback, and there's thinner everywhere. And all 3 of them take forever to defeat, so you're really going to be kicking yourself if you miss your chance with the generator. The one silver lining I can give this fight is that you don't have to worry about which option you take. Unlike the previous bosses in the game, it won't show up in the ending which option you used on him. Not sure if that's an oversight or the developers realizing that this fight's going to be a rough ride regardless of what you choose.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
If you want to play a game that centers around great bosses, one of the best games I can recommend to you for that is Cuphead. For a while, people have been asking me to do a list of my favorite bosses in Cuphead, but I can't really do it because there's so many good ones, I can't really decide which one's my favorite. On the other hand, when it comes to choosing my least favorite boss in the game, that one's pretty easy. Grim Matchstick. Unlike the other bosses in the game, which were frustrating but made me feel like I could eventually beat them, this guy made me rage quit. I eventually came back, thank God, because most of the best bosses are in Area 3 and onward. So, what makes this boss so bad that I initially quit the game? Well, let's find out. The first phase is just fine. His attacks are challenging to avoid, but this is Cuphead. That's kind of to be expected. And it's nothing unmanageable, even when you throw the RNG cloud platforms into the mix. Second phase is a bit trickier. He's tough to hit if you don't have the Seeker, and the fireballs that jump at you seem to do so almost at random, so they're pretty hard to predict. But really, this phase is fine too. What gets this fight on the list is the third phase. So what's so bad about the third phase? Well, for starters, the cloud platforms now are moving away from Grim Matchstick. So in order to stay on the clouds, you have to face away from him, so it's gonna be pretty hard for you to shoot at him. But the worst part is the fireballs. The friggin' fireballs he shoots at you. They move really slowly and they can easily fill up the screen. You can shoot at them, but you do not want to shoot at them, because when you do, they explode in 4 directions and you have to dodge that. This part's not only challenging, but breaks one of the fundamental rules of Cuphead. With every other boss, one of the biggest things you quickly learn in order to win is never stop shooting. Here, if you do that, you're gonna be overwhelmed by all the shots that are coming at you. And as if all that's not enough, randomly in the fight, he can turn into a flamethrower and start breathing fire at you, taking up the entire middle of the screen. That's somewhat difficult normally, and freaking brutal when you're also having to deal with the cloud platforms and fireballs. I swear, if it weren't for the charger, I don't think I ever would have beaten this boss. And the craziest part of all of this is that he's an Area 2 boss, which I find completely ridiculous. The only 2 bosses that even came close to giving me this much trouble were Dr. Call's Robot and King Dice. And even then, it wasn't nearly this bad. And it's not like Area 3 was filled to the brim with difficult bosses. I mean, Werner Werman could have easily been in the first area. Heck, people make a huge deal about Rumor Honeybottoms being tough, but she was a freaking cakewalk compared to Grim. I know it seems excessive to get this angry at a boss fight, that the first 2 phases were actually pretty good, but when the fight's so bad that it makes you rage quit a game that you were actually having a really fun time playing, I think that's worthy of being this high on the list.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
No More Heroes is a series that has a whole catalog full of awesome bosses. However, the second game is infamous for having a couple stinkers in there. Most people say that the game's final boss, Jasper Bat Jr., is the worst. But the thing is, I fought him on easy mode, and he's not really that tough on easy mode. I found some of the earlier bosses harder than him. I know it's kind of cheap to say he's not that bad because I fought him on the easier difficulty, but there's a method behind all this. You see, easy mode does not fix the problems of Million Gunman. For those who don't know, Million Gunman is widely considered to be the second worst boss in the series, and there's pretty good reason for that. First off, you're playing as Shinobu, already a terrible start. Not only does she taunt at the end of combos, leaving you wide open for an attack, but her levels center around platforming, in a game that was in no way designed for platforming. It's funny, both bosses you fight as her show different aspects of why she's a terrible character to play as. With New Destroy Man, it's the taunt thing. However, with Million Gunman, it's the jumping. You see, Million Gunman doesn't exactly have a normal battlefield. It's set up like a multi-layered maze where you constantly have to keep jumping between levels. And his attack pattern? Well, he shoots at you and runs away like a coward. This is so frustrating because of how big and convoluted the battlefield is. Not only are you almost never able to hit him, but half the time you don't even know where he is. So he can keep taking shots at you, then run away before you can even figure out where he is. Not to mention, in a series full of assassins with such memorable personalities, Million Gunman is probably the blandest out of all of them. I recall the Altarch saying that all we knew about him was that he was a president of a bank, but really? Do we even know that? For all we know, he could be a Mr. Fish Odor cosplayer who likes to hide out in bank vaults, or a Bond villain who got rejected because his motive was too similar to Mr. Krabs. See, this guy's so boring that I'm inclined to make up random crap about him just to make him seem like less of a snore. The one upside to this fight, though, is the finisher. It's one of my favorite boss finishers in the whole series.
When the gatekeeper to hell asks who sent you, tell him it was Shinobu Jacobs.
Yes, sir.
Enjoy your trip.
You still spoil my fun, and for that, I'll paint Arkham with your blood.
Number one on this list is a special case. You see, unlike most of the other bosses on this list, this boss technically isn't bad from a gameplay perspective. It's more so as to how it exists within the context of the game, and how it's actually kind of a gigantic middle finger to an earlier boss fight in the game. That boss fight, ladies and gentlemen, is true Orochi from Okami. Now let me start this off by saying that I really like the original fight with Orochi. In fact, I think it's one of the best bosses in the game, right behind Yami and maybe Lechku and Nechku. You see, from the beginning of the game, Orochi was built up as a huge deal. People were terrified of his return. He was able to command a huge presence despite barely appearing on screen. And heck, you would be forgiven for thinking this guy was going to be the final boss. He's not though, he's only the final boss of the first third, but it's still a great boss fight. It's long and really epic. But later in the game, actually pretty close to the end of the game, you end up traveling back in time 100 years ago, when the legends tell that Orochi was at his most powerful. So yeah, you get the idea that you're going to have this epic fight with Orochi at his full power. This is going to be awesome, right? Nope. It's the exact same fight with Orochi that you did earlier. Okay, the fight's not exactly the same. He is more difficult, but not really. You see, he's beefed up with fake difficulty. In other words, just increasing his HP and attack power, just to adjust for how much you've gotten stronger. So you'll have virtually the same amount of difficulty taking down this Orochi than the other one. I mean, seriously, they could have given him more difficult to avoid attacks or changed up how the fight worked. But nope, it's the same. Heck, it would have been better if they didn't beef him up, because at least that would be a measure of how far you've come. But I think the biggest problem with the fight is story-wise. You see, the original fight with Orochi was long, but it worked because of how epic it felt with everything that was going on. Here, it just feels like you're going through the motions. Let me explain. One of the most major and certainly most memorable characters in the first third of the game is Susanoo. He's a funny and likable character, but he's also a selfish, arrogant coward. Heck, he's the reason Orochi's running wild in the first place, because he was so sick of people comparing him to his ancestor Nagi that he tried to prove that the legend of him defeating Orochi wasn't true, which of course backfired horrendously. However, in spite of all his mistakes, you know he's still a good guy. So it makes it so badass in the middle of the fight when he shows up, having conquered his insecurities to save the love of his life and kill the monster that he unleashed. It's freaking awesome, both because it's major character development and because it's a character character that you've spent so much time with getting to like throughout most of the game. In the fight with true Orochi, they try to do the exact same emotional moment, but with Nagi. And here's the thing, what the hell do we know about Nagi? He's Susanoo's ancestor, and he kills Orochi. That's it. I'm expected to care about this guy as much as I cared about Susanoo? Heck, how cheaply they shoved this in kind of makes it feel like an insult to the original moment with Susanoo. Oh, and just to make things even better, you fight true Orochi again in the Arc of Yamato, which isn't that far after this fight. This boss is number 1 because it feels like it took an amazing boss from earlier in the game and just sucked all the life out of it and slapped it in later in the game. Is there anything technically wrong with it gameplay-wise? No, it plays just fine. Although, it definitely feels way too long when you have the same boss fight but without any of the grandiosity that made it so great in the first place. I am Defoffilizer, and I get why there were multiple fights with Orochi. Story-wise, he's the most important villain in the game aside from Yami. But couldn't they have been more creative with the refights with him? That would have been more entertaining. Maybe have the second fight with him play out completely differently than the first. Probably would have made him seem more intimidating too. I don't know. I am Defoffilizer once again, and this outro has gone on way too long. See you in the next video.